The Medici, the name whispers luxury, art, and power. For centuries, these bankers rose to rule Tuscany, shaping Florence into a jewel of the Renaissance. Their palaces glittered with masterpieces, their influence stretched across Europe. But behind the velvet curtains and the gleaming gold, a darker story unfolded. The Grand Dukes, those absolute rulers of Tuscany, kept secrets locked tighter than their treasure vaults. The truth about their reigns, their personal lives, and the methods they used to keep their iron grip on power might just make you question everything you thought you knew. Forget the pretty paintings and the grand architecture. Here are the true tales, the whispered scandals, the chilling realities hidden beneath the polished facade of the Medici Grand Duchy. Prepare to uncover the shadows. Number 8. The Curse of the Bloodline. The Medici Grand Dukes, for all their power and splendor, faced an insidious enemy hidden within their own lineage, the relentless pull of inbreeding. As a ruling dynasty, they sought to solidify their position through strategic marriages, often to other European royal houses or within their own extended family. This practice, common among European nobility, sometimes led to a genetic narrowing that cast a long, dark shadow over their health and the future of their rule. The consequences began to manifest in subtle ways, then became undeniably clear in the later generations, etching a path towards their eventual extinction. One of the most tragic figures marked by this genetic lottery was Gian Gastone de' Medici, the 7th and last Grand Duke. Born in 1671, he was the son of Cosimo III, a Grand Duke whose own life was a tapestry of rigid piety and personal unhappiness. Gian Gastone's childhood was not one of robust health. Accounts speak of a fragile constitution, a certain melancholy, and a deep aversion to the formal court life that awaited him. His very existence was meant to secure the Medici line, yet from his early days, there was a sense of something profoundly amiss. His parents, Cosimo III and Margherita Luisa of Orleans, had a notoriously unhappy marriage, further souring the atmosphere in the Grand Ducal Palace. This tension, combined with the underlying genetic issues, perhaps contributed to Gian Gastone's increasingly reclusive and idiosyncratic behavior as he grew older. His marriage, a desperate attempt by his father to secure an heir, was another source of profound misery and ultimately failure. He was wed to Anna Maria Franziska of Saxe-Lauenburg, a German princess. This union was supposed to produce a robust heir, but it proved to be a disaster. The couple detested each other, and Anna Maria Franziska was known for her coarse manners and her love of hunting and rural life, a stark contrast to Gian Gastone's more refined, though increasingly withdrawn tastes. The marriage remained childless. This lack of an heir was a constant, gnawing worry for the entire Medici court, especially for Grand Duke Cosimo III, who saw the family's future slipping away. The failure to produce children was not merely a personal disappointment. It was a political crisis that echoed through the marble halls of the Pitti Palace. As the years passed, Gian Gastone's health deteriorated further. He suffered from various ailments, including gout and dropsy, a condition characterized by significant swelling due to fluid retention. These physical discomforts were compounded by his mental state. He became increasingly obese, sedentary, and withdrawn. His court became a strange, insular place. He was known to spend days in his bedchamber, surrounded by a curious collection of individuals known as the Ruspanti. These were often lower-class men he paid for company, sometimes engaging in debauched parties, a stark contrast to the austere and pious court of his father. This behavior was shocking to the Florentine elite, and a source of constant scandal, further eroding the image of the once illustrious Medici dynasty. The Ruspanti were said to exploit his generosity and his declining mental faculties, surrounding him in an unhealthy bubble of dissipation. The Grand Duke, once destined for greatness, seemed trapped in a cycle of physical decay and personal despair, unable to escape the weight of his lineage. The genetic problems were not unique to Gian Gastone. His elder brother, Ferdinando de' Medici, the Grand Prince, was also a victim of the family's concentrated bloodline. While Ferdinando was celebrated for his artistic sensibilities and his patronage of music and theater, he was a promising heir, vibrant and cultured. However, his life was tragically cut short. He contracted syphilis, a venereal disease, which combined with his already weakened constitution, led to his slow and agonizing decline. The disease ravaged his body and mind, leaving him increasingly debilitated and eventually insane. His early death in 1713 left Gian Gastone as the only remaining male heir, placing an unbearable burden on a man already struggling with his own issues. Ferdinando's demise was a bitter blow, sealing the fate of the direct male line and throwing the succession into chaos. The Grand Prince, once so full of life and promise, became a living testament to the fragility of the Medici line. Even earlier in the family, subtle signs of this genetic vulnerability could be observed. Cosimo III, Gian Gastone's father, was known for his melancholic disposition and his deep-seated anxieties. While his piety was sincere, it bordered on obsession, and he seemed perpetually burdened by the responsibilities of his rule and the perceived moral failings of his children. His rigid adherence to religious dogma and his inability to find joy in his personal life perhaps reflected a deeper malaise. His strained relationship with his wife Margherita Luisa created an environment of constant discord within the Pitti Palace, contributing to the unhappiness of his children and the overall somber mood of the court. Cosimo III's reign was marked by a gradual decline in Tuscany's economic and political standing, which some historians link to his lack of effective governance and his focus on religious matters over practical statecraft. Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici, Gian Gastone's older sister, was perhaps the strongest of the last generation of Medici. She was intelligent, cultured, and well-traveled, having been Electress Palatine. She returned to Florence after her husband's death, providing a measure of stability and dignity to the increasingly chaotic court of her brother. Yet, even her life was touched by the family's fate. She too remained childless. While her personal health was generally better than her brother's, her role was ultimately to witness the extinction of her magnificent house. It was Anna Maria Luisa who, upon her death, bequeathed the vast Medici art collections, libraries, and treasures to the Tuscan state under the condition that they would never leave Florence. This act, known as the Family Pact, ensured that the Medici's artistic legacy would endure, even as their bloodline faded into history. It was a final poignant gesture of a woman who understood the gravity of her family's end. The end of the Medici Grand Duchy in 1737 with the death of Gian Gastone was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow, agonizing process played out over decades of visible decline marked by physical ailments, mental eccentricities, and the devastating inability to produce an heir. The once vibrant and formidable family, whose cleverness and ambition had built a dynasty, found itself unable to escape the biological trap of its own making. The curse of the bloodline was not some mystical malediction, but the silent, relentless consequence of generations of intermarriage, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance shadowed by the tragic story of its inevitable biological conclusion. The last Grand Dukes were not just rulers, they were living symbols of a dynasty eating itself from the inside, fading away with a sigh rather than a bang. Number 7. The Doctor's Grisly Cabinet. The Medici, especially the later Grand Dukes, were renowned patrons of the sciences. They supported astronomers like Galileo Galilei and fostered a spirit of intellectual inquiry. However, their scientific pursuits, particularly in the realm of medicine and anatomy, sometimes veered into areas that by modern standards would appear deeply unsettling, even macabre. The Grand Dukes maintained a keen interest in the human body, not merely as a subject of philosophical contemplation, but as a tangible object to be dissected, studied, and preserved. This fascination led to the establishment of anatomical theaters and the creation of collections that might make a casual observer shudder. Florence became a significant center for anatomical studies during the Medici Grand Duchy. The University of Pisa, under Medici patronage, had a prestigious medical faculty. Dissection of human bodies was considered a crucial part of medical education, providing direct insight into the complex machinery of the human form. But where did these bodies come from? In a time before ethical donor programs, the sources were often grim. The bodies of executed criminals were frequently supplied to anatomical schools for dissection. The Grand Dukes, with their absolute power, could easily decree that the condemned, after their final punishment, would contribute to the advancement of science. Imagine the scene of public execution, followed by the silent transport of the lifeless body to a sterile, cold anatomical theater where students and professors awaited with scalpels. This was not a private, hidden practice, it was a recognized, if somber, part of the intellectual landscape. Cosimo III, despite his deep piety, maintained an interest in these anatomical studies. He commissioned detailed anatomical wax models, which were incredibly lifelike and often gruesome. These models were not merely academic tools. They were objects of study for the Grand Duke himself and his court. They allowed for the examination of the body's inner workings without the constant need for fresh cadavers. These models were incredibly intricate, depicting muscles, organs, and vascular systems with shocking realism. Some depicted the body in various stages of decay or disease, serving as grim mementos of mortality and the fragility of life. The creation of these models was a painstaking process, often involving talented artists and anatomists working together, blending scientific accuracy with artistic skill. These were not simply models, they were frozen moments of anatomical revelation, born from the very bodies of the deceased. The most famous collection of these wax models eventually found its home in Florence's La Spiccola, the Museum of Natural History. While La Spiccola was founded later in 1775, after the Medici dynasty ended, its origins lay in the Medici's earlier anatomical interests and their desire to accumulate and study such specimens. The sheer volume and graphic nature of these models are testament to a period where the line between scientific inquiry and a certain morbid fascination was often blurred. Visitors to La Spiccola today can still see these astonishing, unsettling creations figures with skin peeled back to reveal muscle and bone, pregnant women with their wombs open to display the fetus, and models illustrating various pathologies and diseases. They were meticulously crafted, sometimes using actual human remains, for reference, providing an unparalleled look into the inner workings of the human body for those who dared to look. The detailed rendering of blood vessels and nerves, all in wax, created a chillingly lifelike representation of death. Beyond the formal anatomical theaters and the wax models, there were whispers of more informal, perhaps less ethical practices. The Grand Dukes had the power to command. If a particular specimen or a rare condition was needed for study, it was often obtained. Body snatching, while not explicitly sanctioned by the state, was a known practice in many European cities where medical schools thrived. Graves, particularly those of the poor or those without strong family ties, could be vulnerable. The Grand Dukes, indirectly through their patronage and demand for new knowledge, created an environment where such activities might be overlooked or quietly tolerated, all in the name of scientific advancement. The quest for knowledge sometimes overshadowed concerns for the dignity of the dead. Francesco I, known for his alchemical pursuits, also had an interest in the human form, albeit perhaps from a slightly different perspective. His studies often blurred the lines between natural philosophy, alchemy, and what we would now call chemistry or biology. He was less interested in formal anatomy, but more in the substances that composed the body and how they could be transformed or understood. His fascination with the physical world extended to its most intricate forms, including life itself. His private laboratory, where he conducted alchemical experiments, might also have been a place where biological specimens were studied or even subjected to chemical processes, seeking to unlock the secrets of life and death through chemical manipulation. The boundary between a laboratory and a dissecting room might have been fluid, especially for a man who delved into the esoteric. The Medici interest in anatomy was not just about understanding disease or perfecting surgical techniques. It was also about power and control. By understanding the human body, the very vessel of life and death, the Grand Dukes reinforced their mastery over their realm and their subjects. They were not just rulers of land and people, They were patrons of the very forces that governed existence. The visual display of anatomical knowledge, whether through live dissections or through detailed models, served to awe and impress, demonstrating the Grand Duke's enlightened patronage and his command over the most profound mysteries. The Medici, through their grisly cabinets and anatomical pursuits, effectively turned the human body, even in death, into another tool for their grandeur and intellectual dominance. They were not just collecting art, they were collecting life, and death in its most intimate and disturbing forms. Number 6. The Grand Duke's unholy obsessions. Beneath the veneer of piety and regal dignity that the Medici Grand Dukes often presented, a darker current of personal scandal and moral ambiguity flowed through the palace walls. The lives of these powerful rulers were not always confined by the strictures of public morality or religious doctrine. Their absolute authority often allowed for personal indulgences, illicit affairs, and unconventional relationships that shocked their contemporaries and left a trail of whispered gossip across Europe. These unholy obsessions revealed a human side to the rulers, often marked by hypocrisy, passion, and a profound lack of restraint. One of the most infamous examples is the passionate and scandalous affair between Grand Duke Francesco I and Bianca Capello. Francesco was already married to Joanna of Austria, a Habsburg princess, a political marriage designed to cement alliances. Joanna was quiet, devout, and generally unpopular in the Florentine court. But Bianca, on the other hand, was Venetian, exquisitely beautiful, and known for her intelligence and charm. She was also married, though her first husband, a Florentine banker named Pietro Bonaventure, was eventually murdered under mysterious circumstances that many attributed to Medici involvement, clearing the way for Bianca's ascent. Francesco's obsession with Bianca was complete. He set her up in a palace near the Pitti, showering her with jewels and attention, openly flouting courtly conventions, and deeply humiliating his wife. The affair continued for years, even as Joanna gave birth to several children, including the future Grand Duke Cosimo II. Bianca's influence over Francesco was immense, and she was seen as a powerful, if unofficial, figure at court. The Florentines whispered about her power and the Grand Duke's devotion. When Joanna finally died in 1578, possibly from complications of childbirth, the path was clear. Just months later, Francesco secretly married Bianca. This was a monumental scandal. A Grand Duke marrying his long-term mistress, a commoner no less, was unheard of for a ruler of his stature. To legitimize the union, Francesco had to navigate a complex web of political and social resistance. He eventually had a grand public wedding ceremony, attempting to force the acceptance of Bianca as Grand Duchess. She was even granted the title Grand Duchess of Tuscany by Pope Gregory XIII. Yet, even as Grand Duchess, Bianca faced animosity from the Florentine nobility and from Francesco's own family, particularly his younger brother, Ferdinando, a cardinal. Ferdinando saw Bianca as an upstart and a threat to the family's purity and political standing. The animosity between Bianca and Ferdinando was a festering wound in the Medici court, leading to constant tension and suspicion. The story of Francesco and Bianca's passionate, illicit affair ending in marriage is often seen as a romantic tragedy, but it also highlights the absolute power of the Grand Duke to bend societal norms to his will, regardless of the scandalous implications. Their obsession with each other ultimately led to their strange, simultaneous deaths, a tale for a later secret. Later in the dynasty, Cosimo III, Francesco's grandson, presented a different kind of unholy obsession. He was devout, almost fanatically so, imposing strict religious observances on his court and his subjects. He sought to create a morally upright Florence, a stark contrast to the more open court of his father, Ferdinando II. However, his personal life was a source of profound unhappiness and failure. His marriage to Margarita Luisa of Orleans was a catastrophe. She was vivacious, outspoken, and fiercely independent, utterly incompatible with Cosimo's rigid, melancholic nature. Their union was a battleground of wills marked by shouting matches, public insults, and private misery. Margherita Luisa openly had affairs and challenged Cosimo's authority, eventually retreating to a convent in France, leaving Cosimo III to reign alone, albeit burdened by profound personal despair. Cosimo III's obsession could be seen as an unyielding, almost pathological devotion to an ideal of piety that he struggled to embody in his personal life. His failure to control his wife and later his children tormented him. He tried to force his son Gian Gastone into a path of moral rectitude and marriage, but Gian Gastone developed his own set of unholy obsessions. Gian Gastone, the last Grand Duke, was known for his love of pleasure, his reclusive lifestyle, and his preference for the company of low-born men. After his unhappy marriage to Anna Maria Francisca, he embraced a life of increasing depravity. He became heavily overweight, suffered from gout, and spent much of his time confined to his bedchamber. Surrounding him was a coterie of young men known as the Responti, literally scrapers, who scraped money from him. These men were often rough, uneducated, and drawn from the lower echelons of Florentine society. Gian Gastone indulged them, providing them with lavish clothes, food, and gifts, all in exchange for their company and reportedly for sexual favors. This was a shocking scandal in the highly conservative Florentine court, especially given Cosimo III's fervent attempts to establish a moralistic atmosphere. The Responti became a symbol of the Medici's decline, a visual representation of a dynasty losing its grip on decorum and dignity. They were said to exploit the Grand Duke's generosity and his increasingly frail mental state, contributing to the decay of the Grand Ducal court. The spectacle of the last Medici Grand Duke surrounded by these questionable characters was a dark stain on the family's legacy, a stark contrast to the sophisticated patronage and artistic brilliance of earlier generations. These unholy obsessions were not merely private peccadillos, they had profound political and social consequences. Francesco I's affair with Bianca Capello strained relations with the Habsburgs and caused deep divisions within his own family. Cosimo III's marital woes and Gian Gastone's scandalous behavior undermined the authority and legitimacy of the Grand Ducal throne, contributing to the perception of a declining dynasty. The lack of legitimate heirs, often tied to these problematic relationships, created a succession crisis that ultimately led to the end of Medici rule in Tuscany. The secrets of the Grand Duke's bedrooms and private lives were not contained within the palace walls. They seeped into the public consciousness, eroding faith in the rulers and painting a vivid, often disturbing picture of power unmoored from conventional morality. The unholy obsessions were a testament to the fact that even the most powerful rulers were still human, sometimes disturbingly so. Number 5, the stolen legacy of the people. The Medici Grand Dukes were masters of accumulating wealth, a skill they honed from their banking origins. While they presented themselves as benevolent rulers and generous patrons of the arts, the immense riches that flowed into their coffers often came at a significant cost to the ordinary people of Tuscany. Their financial practices, tax policies, and control over trade and industry sometimes amounted to a systematic exploitation of their subjects, draining the vitality from the Grand Duchy for the benefit of the ruling house. The legacy they left was not just one of art and architecture, but also of a populace struggling under the weight of their financial demands. From the very beginning of their Grand Ducal rule, the Medici sought to consolidate their financial power. Cosimo, the first Grand Duke, was relentless in this pursuit. He inherited a city-state that was still recovering from internal strife and external threats. He transformed Florence into a true, absolute monarchy, and this transformation included establishing rigorous financial controls. He instituted new taxes and tightened the collection of existing ones. One of his key strategies was to gain control over crucial economic sectors. He established state monopolies on certain goods, such as salt, tobacco, and specific manufactured items. These monopolies meant that only the Grand Duke or those he specifically licensed could produce or sell these items, allowing him to dictate prices and reap enormous profits. This system ensured a steady flow of income directly into the Grand Ducal treasury, often at the expense of independent merchants and the general populace who had no choice but to buy from the state-controlled sources. Cosimo I also reformed the tax system, making it more efficient and arguably more burdensome. He introduced indirect taxes on consumption, which affected everyone from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest peasant. The gabella, a tax on goods entering or leaving the city, was a consistent source of revenue. The decima, a property tax, was also rigorously enforced. While taxes are necessary for any state, the Medici system often felt extractive, with the primary aim being to enrich the Grand Duke and his family rather than to invest broadly in public welfare or infrastructure, beyond what directly benefited their prestige or military strength. The people often felt that their hard-earned money was being siphoned off to fund the lavish lifestyles of the court and the Grand Duke's ambitious political projects. The vast landholdings of the Medici family also contributed significantly to their wealth. They owned immense tracts of fertile land across Tuscany, which they leased out or managed directly. The rents and agricultural produce from these estates provided a steady stream of income. They also controlled key ports like Livorno, developing it into a major free port, which brought in substantial customs duties and facilitated their own mercantile activities. While Livorno did bring some prosperity to the region, the primary beneficiary was the Grand Ducal coffers, which benefited directly from the increased trade. The Medici were shrewd businessmen, and they never forgot their banking roots, applying financial acumen to statecraft. However, as the generations of Grand Dukes passed, their financial management often became less prudent. The later Grand Dukes, particularly Cosimo III and Gian Gastone, inherited a vast fortune, but often failed to manage it effectively. Their reigns were marked by increasing expenses, often due to the maintenance of an elaborate court, lavish ceremonies, and large dowries for their daughters marrying into other European royal houses. Cosimo III, for example, spent enormous sums on religious pilgrimages and ceremonies, sometimes neglecting more pressing economic matters. The decline of Florentine industry, partly due to competition from other European powers, and partly due to heavy taxation and lack of innovation under Medici rule, further strained the economy. The cumulative effect of these policies and expenditures was a gradual impoverishment of the Tuscan population. While the Grand Dukes lived in unparalleled luxury in the Pitti Palace, many ordinary citizens struggled. Famine was not uncommon in Tuscany during periods of bad harvest, and the state's response was often insufficient, or its existing policies exacerbated the problem. The heavy burden of taxes, combined with the Grand Ducal monopolies, stifled private enterprise and innovation among the general population. Small businesses found it difficult to compete with state-controlled entities, and farmers often saw a significant portion of their produce go towards taxes and rents. The system was also riddled with corruption. While the Grand Dukes might have established rules, their immense power meant that they and their favorite courtiers could bend or break them. Favorites could be granted lucrative monopolies or tax exemptions, further distorting the market and creating resentment among those who had to bear the full financial weight. The Grand Dukes' focus on personal and dynastic prestige often outweighed the economic well-being of their subjects. They were more concerned with maintaining their grandeur and securing their dynastic future through lavish expenditures than with fostering widespread prosperity. The final years of the Medici Grand Duchy under Gian Gastone saw a significant decline in the Grand Duchy's financial health. The state coffers were increasingly depleted, partly due to Gian Gastone's own personal extravagance and his preference for indulging his Responti companions, but also due to the accumulated economic stagnation of previous decades. The Grand Duchy, once a vibrant economic powerhouse under earlier Medici rule, became a shadow of its former self. The stolen legacy was not just about the money taken through taxes and monopolies. It was also about the missed opportunities for broader economic development, the stifling of innovation, and the gradual impoverishment of a people whose resources were primarily directed towards sustaining the lavish lifestyle and political ambitions of their Grand Ducal rulers. The wealth of the Medici was undeniable, but its source and its impact on the lives of ordinary Tuscans reveal a much darker truth about their rule. Number 4. The dungeon beneath the Duomo. While the Duomo stands as a magnificent symbol of Florentine artistic and spiritual aspiration, the dungeon beneath the Duomo is a metaphorical reference to the harsh, often brutal, reality of Medici justice and state control. The Grand Dukes, especially after Cosimo I, transformed Florence into an absolute monarchy, established a powerful and terrifying apparatus of justice. Their rule was maintained not just by cultural patronage and political savvy, but also by fear, surveillance, and swift, often cruel, punishment for dissent. The prisons, interrogation rooms, and public executions were stark reminders of the Grand Duke's unchallengeable authority. The Bargello Palace, now a renowned sculpture museum, was once the primary police headquarters and prison of Florence, serving as the grim heart of Medici law enforcement. Its imposing stone walls and narrow windows housed not just criminals but also political prisoners, those who dared to question or challenge the Grand Duke's power. Inside, the justice system operated with little regard for modern notions of due process. Accused individuals, whether common thieves or suspected conspirators, faced a system designed to extract confessions. Torture was a recognized and widely used tool of interrogation. The strappato, where a prisoner was hoisted to the ceiling by their wrists, sometimes with weights attached to their feet, and then suddenly dropped, dislocating their shoulders, was a common method. The rack, which stretched the body, was another. Its methods were applied systematically, often until a confession, true or false, was obtained. The screams from the Bargello's torture chambers were a well-known, chilling sound in old Florence, a constant whisper of the Grand Duke's reach. The Grand Duke Cosimo, the first, established the Auto di Guardia e Balia, 8 of Guard and Justice, a powerful magistracy that served as the primary instrument of state control and judicial authority. This body was directly answerable to the Grand Duke, ensuring that justice served his interests. They investigated crimes, arrested suspects, and oversaw interrogations and trials. Their decisions were often final, and appeals were rare and difficult. This system effectively centralized power in the Grand Duke's hands, allowing him to suppress any perceived threats swiftly and decisively. The Auto were his eyes and ears, and their reach extended into every corner of Florentine society. Public executions were a common spectacle in Grand Ducal Florence, serving as a grim deterrent and a vivid display of state power. The Piazza della Signoria, where Cosimo I's palace stood, was frequently the site of these events. Criminals, rebels, and traitors were beheaded, hanged, or burned at the stake, their fates serving as a stark warning to anyone contemplating defiance. The bodies of executed criminals were sometimes left on display for days as a further deterrent. These public displays of punishment were not just about retribution, they were carefully choreographed performances designed to reinforce the absolute authority of the Grand Duke and to instill fear and obedience in the populace. The sight of a severed head on a pike or a corpse swaying from a gibbet was a chilling reminder of the consequences of challenging Medici rule. The Stinche prison was another notorious institution, primarily for debtors and those who committed lesser crimes. While perhaps not as overtly terrifying as the Bargello, conditions in the Stinche were often dire. Overcrowding, disease, and starvation were common. Families of prisoners often had to provide food and bedding, as the state offered little. The Stinche represented a more general form of state control, ensuring that even minor transgressions or financial misfortunes could lead to a loss of liberty and dignity. It was a place where ordinary Florentines could find themselves trapped, their lives disrupted by the seemingly indifferent machinery of Grand Ducal law. Beyond the physical prisons, the Grand Duke's power extended to psychological control. The constant threat of arrest, torture, and punishment created an atmosphere of pervasive fear. Citizens learned to be careful about what they said and to whom. whispers of dissent could lead to grave consequences. This pervasive fear was a crucial component of Medici absolute rule, ensuring that any challenge to their authority was stifled before it could grow. Even the wealthiest and most influential families were not immune. A wrong word or a perceived slight against the Grand Duke could lead to imprisonment, exile, or the confiscation of property. This created an environment where loyalty was paramount and suspicion was an ever-present companion. The Grand Dukes also used exile as a form of punishment, particularly for noble families who posed a threat. Stripping individuals of their property and forcing them to leave, Florence was a highly effective way to neutralize opposition without resorting to public executions, which could sometimes generate sympathy or martyrs. Those exiled often found themselves impoverished and without influence, serving as a warning to other potential dissidents. The Medici were masters of political control, using a combination of patronage, surveillance, and brutal justice to maintain their grip. The dungeon beneath the Duomo, then, represents the hidden dark side of Medici power. It was the system of repression that ensured their cultural patronage and political maneuvers could flourish unchecked. The art, the architecture, the splendor of Florence all stood on a foundation of absolute control enforced by fear and the constant threat of the prison, the torturer's tools, and the executioner's blade. The Grand Duke's magnificent city was also a city under constant watch, where the whisper of dissent could lead to a chilling journey into the darkness of the state's justice. Number 3, the alchemist's shadow. Grand Duke Francesco I de' Medici, who reigned from 1574 to 1587, was a man of intense curiosity, but his intellectual pursuits often veered into the secretive and mysterious realm of alchemy. While his predecessors were renowned for their patronage of classical arts and humanistic studies, Francesco cultivated a deep fascination with experimentation, the natural world, and the arcane arts, blurring the lines between nascent chemistry, metallurgy, and the elusive quest for transformation. His private laboratory in the Palazzo Vecchio, known as the Studiolo di Francesco I, became a symbol of his singular obsession, a place shrouded in rumor and potentially dangerous endeavors. The Studiolo was not a typical Grand Ducal apartment. It was a small, windowless room hidden away on the first floor of the Palazzo Vecchio, accessible only to Francesco and a select few. Its walls were adorned with paintings depicting the elements, alchemical processes, and mythological figures, all hinting at the Grand Duke's secret interests. This intimate space was filled with furnaces, retorts, crucibles, and all manner of strange instruments. Here Francesco spent countless hours, often late into the night, personally engaged in chemical experiments. He was not merely a patron, he was a hands-on practitioner driven by a profound desire to understand and manipulate the fundamental properties of matter. Francesco's alchemical pursuits were not entirely divorced from practical application. He was deeply interested in the production of new types of porcelain, glass, and dyes, attempting to replicate and even surpass techniques from the Far East. The famous Medici porcelain, a soft-paste porcelain that predated most European efforts, was a direct result of his personal experimentation in the Studiolo. He was also interested in mining and metallurgy, seeking to extract precious metals and improve their refinement. These endeavors had clear economic implications, aiming to create new industries and bring wealth to Tuscany. He viewed the transformation of base materials into valuable substances as a reflection of nature's own secrets, which he sought to uncover. However, the shadow side of alchemy often involved more than just practical chemistry. Alchemy in the 16th century was intertwined with astrology, magic, and the occult. It was the quest for the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance believed to transmute base metals into gold and to grant eternal life. It also sought the universal panacea, a cure for all diseases. While Francesco might have had a more pragmatic approach to some aspects of his work, the underlying mystique and the esoteric nature of alchemy would have undoubtedly appealed to his inquisitive and somewhat reclusive nature. Whispers persisted that his experiments were not always benign, sometimes involving the distillation of poisons and strange elixirs. The connection between alchemy and toxicology was not insignificant. The same processes and substances used to transform metals could also be used to create potent poisons. Francesco, like many rulers of his time, was aware of the political uses of poison. The Medici, after all, had a history of suspicious deaths surrounding them, a topic for another secret. His intense study of chemical reactions and compounds would have given him an intimate knowledge of various toxins. It is said that he experimented with different poisons, perhaps to understand their effects or to develop antidotes. This aspect of his work, often conducted in secrecy, fueled dark rumors about his involvement in the mysterious deaths that sometimes occurred in his court. The atmosphere around Francesco's studiolo was one of profound secrecy. Only a few trusted individuals were allowed to enter, including Bernardo Buontalenti, the multi-talented architect and engineer who designed the studiolo itself. This secrecy, combined with the mysterious nature of alchemy, naturally bred suspicion and fear. The Florentine court, always alive with gossip and intrigue, would have viewed Francesco's private laboratory as a place of dark arts and forbidden knowledge. His reclusive nature and his preference for solitary experimentation further added to the mystique, making him seem aloof and slightly sinister to some. Francesco's scientific interests were not confined to the studiolo. He established the Grand Ducal Apothecary, a sophisticated laboratory where medicines and chemical compounds were prepared. This institution served as a center for practical chemical research and the production of various remedies and, potentially, other substances. He also amassed a vast collection of natural curiosities, exotic plants, minerals, and strange animal specimens, all housed in his private rooms, reflecting his broader fascination with the hidden order of the natural world. These collections were not just for display, they were subjects of study, providing raw materials for his alchemical and chemical experiments. The shadow cast by Francesco's alchemical pursuits was not merely about the possibility of poison. It was also about the perception of a ruler delving into the unknown, perhaps even the forbidden. In an age where science and magic were still intertwined, a Grand Duke so deeply immersed in these esoteric practices could be seen as either a genius or a dangerous sorcerer. His dedication to experimentation, sometimes at the expense of traditional courtly duties, marked him as a unique, complex figure, a man driven by an insatiable curiosity that led him down paths few others dared to tread. The studiolo remains a powerful symbol of this Grand Duke's secret world, a testament to his intellect, his ambition, and the darker, more unsettling aspects of his scientific obsessions, where the boundaries of knowledge, power, and the unknown converged. Number 2, the spies and the secret police. The Medici Grand Dukes, particularly Cosimo I, were not just patrons of art and culture, they were also masters of political control. To consolidate and maintain their absolute power over Tuscany, they built a sophisticated and pervasive network of spies and secret police. This apparatus of surveillance and repression ensured that every whisper of dissent, every potential conspiracy, and every challenge to their authority was swiftly detected and crushed. Florence, for all its beauty and intellectual vibrancy, became a city under constant watch, where trust was a luxury and silence often the safest option. The primary instrument of this state control was the Auto di Guardia e Balia, the Aid of Guard and Justice. While this body had judicial functions, its real power lay in its role as the Grand Duke's intelligence agency. The Auto employed a vast network of informants known as spy or biri, who infiltrated every level of Florentine society. These spies could be found everywhere in the markets, in taverns, among the nobility, and even within the domestic staffs of prominent families. They listened to conversations, observed suspicious gatherings, and reported back to the Auto on anything that might indicate disloyalty or sedition. No secret was safe from their ears, no private gathering truly private. The reports from these informants were meticulously compiled and presented to the Grand Duke. Cosimo I, in particular, was known for his insatiable desire for information. He wanted to know everything that was happening in his domain, from major political movements to minor personal squabbles that might have broader implications. This constant flow of intelligence allowed him to preemptively neutralize threats, identify potential enemies, and maintain a tight grip on power. The knowledge that the Grand Duke possessed such detailed information, even about seemingly trivial matters, created an atmosphere of paranoia. People learned to be guarded in their speech, knowing that a casual remark could lead to a visit from the Biri and a dark journey to the Bargello. The Auto did not just collect information, they also acted as the Grand Duke's enforcement arm. They had the power to arrest individuals without warning, conducting searches and interrogations. Their methods, as discussed in the section on the dungeon, were often brutal, designed to extract confessions and identify accomplices. The suspects were often taken to the Bargello, where they faced an intimidating and often terrifying process of interrogation, including the use of torture. The goal was not necessarily justice in a modern sense, but rather the maintenance of state security and the Grand Duke's authority. Dissidents were not simply punished. They were often made examples of, their fates serving as stark warnings to anyone who dared to challenge the Medici. Cosimo I was particularly adept at using this system to dismantle the power of rival Florentine families who had once held significant influence in the Republican era. He would subtly undermine their networks, arrest their members on dubious charges, or confiscate their property, effectively neutralizing any lingering opposition to his absolute rule. Families like the Strozzi or the Salviati, once powerful and independent, found their influence systematically eroded by the Grand Duke's secret police. Those who resisted often met grim fates, their reputations ruined, and their families scattered. This process transformed Florence from a republic with powerful families into an absolute monarchy firmly under Medici control. The Grand Dukes also maintained an extensive network of diplomatic intelligence abroad. Their ambassadors and agents in other European courts were not just involved in formal diplomacy, they also gathered intelligence on political developments, military movements, and the internal affairs of foreign powers. This information was crucial for the Medici to navigate the complex political landscape of Renaissance Europe, allowing them to make informed decisions about alliances and threats. These agents were essentially spies working on a grand scale, ensuring that the Grand Duke was always aware of the broader geopolitical chess game being played out around him. The system of spies and secret police was not just a tool for suppressing overt rebellion. It also served to enforce the Grand Duke's will in more subtle ways. Social control, moral conformity, and even the regulation of everyday life were all within the purview of this system. Public morality was policed, and those who deviated from accepted norms could find themselves under scrutiny. This pervasive surveillance created a chilling effect, where citizens understood that the Grand Duke's gaze extended into every corner of their lives, fostering a culture of self-censorship and outward conformity. Even the Grand Dukes themselves were not immune to this pervasive atmosphere of suspicion. They often relied on trusted confidantes, but deep down they knew that anyone could be an informant, and loyalty was a fluid concept. This environment of constant vigilance created an isolated existence for the rulers who could never be entirely sure of the true intentions of those around them. The vast network of spies and secret police, while ensuring the Grand Duke's power, also wrapped the entire court in a thick layer of paranoia, a testament to the heavy price of absolute rule. Florence, under the Medici Grand Dukes, was a city of unparalleled artistic beauty, but it was also a city where shadows constantly watched, and secrets could lead to swift, terrifying consequences. Number 1, the poisons in the palace walls. The glittering world of the Medici Grand Dukes was often stained by whispers of poison. In an era where political power was brutally contested and family ambition knew few bounds, poison became a clandestine weapon, a silent killer that could eliminate rivals, resolve inconvenient alliances, or even it was rumored, settle scores within the ruling family itself. The Grand Ducal palaces, with their magnificent art and opulent chambers, sometimes harbored a darker secret, the chilling possibility that death could arrive quietly, unexpectedly, in a cup of wine or a tempting meal. One of the most persistent and unsettling rumors surrounds the deaths of Cosimo I's own sons, Giovanni and Garzia. In 1562, Cosimo, then Grand Duke, embarked on a hunting trip with his sons, Giovanni and Garzia, along with his wife, Eleonora of Toledo. During this trip, both Giovanni and Garzia died within a short period of each other. The official explanation was that they succumbed to malaria, a common disease in marshy areas of Tuscany. However, the timing and the circumstances immediately fueled dark speculation. Giovanni, a cardinal, was a promising and intelligent young man. Garzia was also young and spirited. The sudden loss of two such prominent sons was a devastating blow to the Grand Ducal family and left a profound void. The rumors that spread through Florence were far more sinister. It was whispered that Garzia had killed his brother Giovanni in a fit of rage, perhaps during a quarrel during the hunt. Some accounts suggested a dispute over a woman or a simple argument between hot-headed brothers. Then, in an act of furious retribution, Cosimo I himself supposedly murdered Garzia with his own hands, or by poison, to avenge Giovanni's death. This narrative, though never proven, gained traction and became a persistent part of Medici legend. The idea that a father, a ruler, would kill his own son, regardless of the provocation, was a truly shocking thought, but it spoke to the brutal lengths to which power struggles could extend even within the closest family bonds. The official story of malaria served as a convenient cover, shrouding a possibly horrific truth in medical ambiguity. Their mother, Eleonora of Toledo, already unwell, was said to have been so devastated by their deaths that she died shortly after, consumed by grief and perhaps knowledge of a darker reality. Another infamous case of suspected poisoning involves Grand Duke Francesco I and his second wife, Bianca Capello. Their love story, as noted earlier, was a scandalous tale of illicit passion and a controversial marriage, but their end was even more mysterious. In October 1587, Francesco and Bianca were staying at the Medici villa at Poggio a Caiano. They both fell ill with a sudden and severe fever, followed by intense vomiting. Within days, both were dead. The official cause of death was attributed to malaria, another common Florentine killer. However, given their history and the intense animosity between Bianca and Francesco's brother, Ferdinando, whispers of poison immediately began to circulate. Ferdinando de' Medici, then a cardinal, was known to despise Bianca, seeing her as an ambitious commoner who had usurped his brother's affections and threatened the purity of the Medici bloodline. He had never accepted her as Grand Duchess and constantly clashed with her. Upon Francesco's death, Ferdinando was poised to become the next Grand Duke. The suspicious timing of their simultaneous deaths, coupled with Ferdinando's known hatred for Bianca and his ambition, led many to believe that he had poisoned both of them. Some speculated that only Bianca was the target, and Francesco inadvertently consumed the poison meant for her. While others believed he orchestrated the deaths of both to ensure an unchallenged ascent to power. Forensic investigations conducted in the 21st century on the remains believed to be those of Francesco and Bianca have indeed found traces of arsenic. This finding lends significant weight to the long-held suspicion of poisoning, although it does not definitively prove who administered it or their motive. The official narrative of malaria has been challenged by modern scientific evidence, leaving a chilling historical puzzle. The sudden, convenient deaths of the Grand Duke and his controversial wife allowed his brother to step into power, clearing the slate of a problematic marriage and securing the succession. The incident remains one of the darkest and most intriguing unsolved mysteries of the Medici dynasty, a testament to the brutal realities of power politics in Renaissance Italy. The use of poison as a political tool was not unique to the Medici, but its suspected application within their own inner circle highlights the extreme lengths to which ambition and self-preservation could lead. It created an atmosphere of profound distrust within the palace. Every meal, every drink, every seemingly innocent gift could potentially conceal a deadly secret. Courtiers and family members alike would have been acutely aware of the possibility of being targeted, leading to constant vigilance and suspicion. The magnificent banquets and glittering ceremonies in the Pitti Palace were often held under the unspoken shadow of a quiet, unseen killer. The Medici, like many powerful families of their time, had access to experts in chemistry and pharmacology, some of whom could have been coerced or incentivized to prepare lethal substances. The pursuit of alchemy, as discussed previously with Francesco I, also meant an intimate knowledge of toxins and their effects. This scientific expertise, combined with absolute power and a ruthless drive for control, created a dangerous cocktail. The poisons in the palace walls were not just chemical compounds, they were symbolic of the dark undercurrents of power, fear, and ambition that permeated the very core of the Medici Grand Duchy, leaving a lasting legacy of intrigue and unanswered questions about the true cost of supreme authority.